There's a moment in every human life that feels colder than winter. It is not the cold of weather, but the cold of realization. A realization that slowly settles inside the chest like a quiet storm. The moment you understand that the world you trusted is not as loyal as you believed, that the people you once called allies were not necessarily standing beside you. They were simply standing near you. And proximity is not the same as loyalty. For most of life, people move through social circles without questioning them. Friends, colleagues, relatives, familiar faces, a network of smiles and casual conversations. It feels stable. It feels safe. But this stability is often built on an invisible contract, a silent agreement that no one speaks about openly. The contract says something simple: stay the same as us. Move at the same speed. Do not rise too far above the group. As long as you obey this invisible rule, everything appears peaceful. You are accepted. You're comfortable. You belong. But the moment you begin to change, the atmosphere shifts. Not violently, not dramatically, quietly, almost invisibly. Conversations pause when you approach. Smiles become slightly tighter. Energy changes. You cannot always explain it, but you can feel it. Something in the room has turned. And in that moment, many people panic because human beings are wired for belonging. Our ancestors survived by staying inside the tribe. Isolation once meant death. So when modern humans feel social rejection, their brain reacts as if survival itself is threatened. The instinct becomes desperate. Explain yourself. Defend yourself. Convince them. Apologize if necessary. Return to the warmth of the group. But there's a deeper truth hidden behind these moments of social tension. Often the rejection is not caused by your weakness. It is caused by your evolution. When a person begins to grow in discipline, ambition, or independence, they unintentionally disrupt the equilibrium of their environment. Growth is disruptive, not because growth is wrong, but because it exposes stagnation. Your progress becomes a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable. When someone begins improving their health, their focus, their finances, their knowledge, something subtle happens around them. Others begin to compare themselves, even if they do not say it aloud, even if they are not fully aware of it. The comparison exists, and comparison creates tension because it forces a silent question into the mind of others. If he can change, why haven't I? Most people do not want to face that question, so the mind finds a simpler solution. It attacks the mirror, not the reflection. The mirror, the person who represents change. This is why history repeatedly shows the same pattern. The individual who tries to break away from the average often becomes the target of criticism, mockery, or resistance. Not because they deserve it, but because they disturb the psychological comfort of the group. Human groups often behave like a bucket of crabs. When one crab tries to climb out, the others pull it back down. Not out of hatred, but out of instinct. A strange instinct to maintain equality in limitation. For this reason, one of the most difficult psychological transitions in life is the shift from seeking approval to seeking purpose. Approval is comforting. Purpose is isolating. Approval keeps you inside the circle. Purpose sometimes pushes you outside of it. Many people never make this transition. They spend their entire lives adjusting their behavior to maintain acceptance. They shrink their dreams. They soften their ambitions. They dim their intelligence, all to avoid standing out too much. But those who do choose purpose over approval enter a different psychological landscape. It is a landscape that includes solitude, silence, misunderstanding, but also clarity. Because solitude has a strange power. When the noise of social validation disappears, something else begins to emerge. Self-definition. You are no longer guided by applause, you are guided by conviction. And conviction is a much deeper fuel. The world often misunderstands silence. People assume silence means weakness. They assume it means defeat, but silence can also mean preparation. Throughout history, some of the most powerful transformations happened in periods of quiet withdrawal. Periods where individuals disappeared from public attention, not because they gave up, but because they were building something: strength, knowledge, strategy, character. When the world becomes hostile, the worst response is often loud defensiveness, arguments, public explanations, endless attempts to prove innocence, because when you argue with a crowd, you give the crowd power over your emotional state. You allow their opinions to dictate your energy. But there's another strategy, a quieter one, a colder one: withdrawal, strategic silence. When a person refuses to feed gossip with reaction, the fire slowly dies, because gossip requires fuel, drama requires participation, hatred requires attention. Without those things, it weakens. Meanwhile, the individual who withdraws gains something extremely valuable: time. Time to observe, time to improve, time to become stronger. There's an ancient psychological advantage in being underestimated. The world often reveals its true nature when it believes you are harmless. People become careless. They reveal intentions. They expose weaknesses. History contains many examples of individuals who survived hostile environments by appearing smaller than they truly were. Not out of cowardice, but out of patience. Patience is one of the rarest strategic virtues. Most people want immediate victory, immediate recognition, immediate revenge. But reality rewards long-term thinking. The most powerful revenge in existence is not emotional retaliation, it is transformation. Imagine someone who once faced ridicule, doubt, and dismissal. Now imagine that person returning years later stronger, wiser, more successful, calm, unbothered, unaffected. That kind of victory does something interesting. It erases the importance of the original conflict. Because once the gap becomes large enough, criticism loses meaning. A lion does not argue with sheep about hunting techniques, not because the sheep are evil, but because their perspective is irrelevant. Power changes the conversation, and true power is rarely loud. It is built quietly. Discipline, consistency, long hours of unseen effort. The world often celebrates results, but ignores preparation. Yet preparation is where the real transformation happens. A single year of focused effort can change the trajectory of an entire life. But most people never experience this because they abandon their efforts too early, usually right at the moment when resistance appears. Resistance is misunderstood. People assume resistance means they are moving in the wrong direction. But often resistance means the opposite. It means movement is happening. Growth creates friction. Friction creates heat. Heat creates pressure. And pressure creates transformation. Just like muscle grows stronger after stress, the human mind evolves through challenge. Without challenge, character remains shallow. Comfort creates softness. Adversity creates depth. That does not mean pain should be glorified, but it should be understood. Every obstacle carries information. Every criticism reveals perception. Even hostility can become useful if analyzed calmly. Enemies, strangely enough, can function as honest auditors. Friends protect feelings. Enemies reveal flaws. If a person has the discipline to extract lessons from hostility, rather than simply reacting emotionally, the hostility becomes valuable. It becomes data. Data that improves strategy. Data that sharpens awareness. Eventually, the individual who once felt surrounded begins to see the situation differently. The opposition that once seemed like a wall begins to look like a collection of individuals. And individuals are never perfectly united. Groups appear powerful from the outside, but internally, they are full of cracks. Different motivations, different fears, different loyalties, Time exposes these fractures, especially when the original target stops reacting. Eventually, the energy of the group dissolves because conflict requires focus. And without a clear target, attention turns inward. But by then, the individual who once stood alone has already changed. Solitude has reshaped them. Struggle has hardened them. They are no longer the same person who once sought approval. They are something else entirely. Independent, self-directed, calm under pressure, and perhaps most importantly, no longer afraid of standing alone. This is a rare psychological state. Most people cannot tolerate isolation long enough to reach it. They rush back toward familiarity, toward comfort, toward acceptance, but those who endure the silence eventually gain something powerful: freedom. Freedom from emotional dependency, freedom from social manipulation, freedom from the invisible contracts that limit most lives. At that point, something interesting happens. The people who once doubted you often begin to change their tone. Success has a strange effect on memory. Critics become supporters. Opponents become admirers. History is quietly rewritten. Suddenly they say things like, "I always knew you would succeed." But by then, their opinions no longer carry the same weight, because the real transformation already happened internally. You no longer need their belief. You built your own. And that may be the deepest victory of all. Not wealth, not recognition, but independence of mind. The ability to walk your path without needing permission. The courage to pursue growth, even when it disrupts comfort. And the understanding that sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the quiet ones. The moments where the world feels cold. The moments where the room feels different. The moments where you realize you may have to stand alone. Because those moments are not necessarily signs of failure. Sometimes they are the beginning of becoming someone extraordinary.